If you want to read the best 20 books that I've read in my life, then I won't be recommending reading Dune or Name of the Wind, because even though I love those books, they're not actually in my top 20. Let's discover which books are in that list. And we will start this journey with 3 middle grade books that are out of this world, starting with the Bartimaeus Series by Jonathan Stroud. And these marked the beginning of fantasy for me. We'll follow our main character, who is a little bit of a misfit, a young magician that still needs to prove a lot of stuff. It's very plot driven, fast and funny. Then we move to Northern Lights by Philip Pullman. This trilogy is not as young, I believe. We will have this main character, Lyra. We will follow her throughout this path of growing up, of discovering magic, of discovering her place. The relationship that we see with her animal companion, it's priceless. Also how she discovers love, it's very thrilling, and really the world building and the setting itself, it's something that really blowed my mind. And we conclude with Inkheart by Cornelia Fung, perfect for book lovers. It has this cozy yet adventurous feeling, and the premise of this story is that there's this girl that has the ability to read, and when reading she can bring back things from books. And thanks to these next 4 books, I discovered that I was a fantasy reader, a sci-fi reader, and that I loved reading, starting with The Dying of Light by George R.R. Martin. Now, he is well known by Game of Thrones, and I will get there. Deeply romantic, but at the same time, it's set on space, very character-driven, it's very short, and this became the book that I reread when I was young every summer. And although my love for fantasy was ignited by Elantris by Brandon Sanderson, in reality, what settled the deal for me was the Mistborn trilogy by the same author, with a hard magic system that is so incredible, and to date I'm still struggling to find other magic systems that are as good. We will have these different characters that are able to ingest metals, and as a result they are able to do magical things. So some are able to persuade people to change their emotions, others can fly, and there's this high status quo where we will have this evil one that has been ruling for a lot of time. But when things started to get serious is when I realized that I was able to commit to long series with Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin. Reading this book was for the first time the idea of having a lot of different characters in the same world, having different points of view in this massive story, and it was mind-blowing to me to not know who is good and who is bad. But also, the Throne of Glass series by Sarah J. Maas, composed by 7 books, was a milestone to me because I discovered fantasy romance. It is really good if you're starting with fantasy. The story begins following this girl who is an assassin, and she being retrieved by the king in order to be his champion in this set of tournaments. From that moment, I discovered that young adult can also be amazing, and there were 3 books that deeply marked me, starting with Strange to Dreamer by Laini Taylor. This is a duology, it's concluded. The writing style of this author, it's not all over the top, it's just beautiful and heartbreaking, a little bit similar to the writing style of Madeline Miller in The Song of Achilles, I guess, but being a little bit more whimsical. And in this case, we'll follow a misfit through a quest and finding this magical, mystical city called Weep. The Shadow of the Fox by Julie Kagawa, it's very precious to me because it manages to have an amazing quest, this Japanese feudal setting, which I am completely in love with, but at the same time, the things that happened were also weirdly emotional, and we had this frantic pace, these different monsters that we need to defeat, but the story remained beautiful and fun and lighthearted. And I'll go real quick with this last one, and that is The Aurelian Cycle by Rosaria Munda. An incredible blend of amazing tropes that you cannot miss. You have dragons, truly a political game, and one of these 2 main characters was the first one that in my life I saw reflected as. And before we go to the amazing adult fantasy books that are the best for me, let's go to a sci-fi book that has my whole heart, and that is Project Hail Mary, classic sci-fi trope. So we will have this guy that wakes up one day in space and he does not really know why he's there. So optimistic, so heartbreaking. Right, but now taking adult fantasy and making it a commitment. Let's say that the Stormlight Archive, it's the best fantasy series that I've read in my life, and this is till date my favorite saga. I think they're masterpieces because the characters are incredibly relatable. The massive story that unfolds unfolds, it's fascinating. At its core, it's a war between different species, continuing with Sanderson, but this time with a standalone. We have Warbreaker. The magic system, it's beautiful. The different points of view are fascinating, and it's a very good blend between a political, a religious, an adventurous, and a romantic book. And we will also have a murderous sentient sword. Then we have a trilogy that it's kind of like a hidden gem. It's not that well known, but it's a very good blend between fantasy and sci-fi, and that is the Winnowing Flame trilogy. It's very character driven. We'll have 3 different points of view. As a reader, we won't be able to understand what is happening in the first book, but the reading itself was really fulfilling. And once that you understand this mystery, everything comes together. We live in this world where every now and then there are these wars, but no one remembers who are these enemies or how to fight them. Let's enter now the realm of pain and suffering with The Puppy War by Arif Kwang. I hated this trilogy in the beginning. Arif Kwang has this ability of making you feel things, and she writes with such passion, with such, there's something in her books. But beware, because it is savage. There's a lot of trigger warnings. What you will find here are characters that are incredibly morally grey, and following them will be kind of like a mission. And the last book that belongs to this realm of pain, it's The Sword of Kaigen. This is probably my second favorite book of all time. Follows a mother and a son, which is really not something that we're used to. And we'll also have elemental magic, which is something that I love. In this case, it's going to be ice. The war scenes are incredible, and there are some scenes that are just so deep, and I might have left the best for the last, because now we will conclude with the 4 books that are my current obsession. Starting with the Droning Empire series by Andrea Stewart. It's such a blend of fantasy, horror, sci-fi, so it has a little bit of everything. It has different points of view. This is a story that is also massive, with stakes that are really high and very great characters. In terms of tropes, we will have a growing up story, this anti-hero vibe, kind of like fighting to discover a secret, and I really thought the writing style was phenomenal. It has an incredible hard magic system. And then a standalone that completely stole my heart, Guns of the Dawn by Adrian Tchaikovsky. This writer, it's so good, and he is kind of like an underdog. Like, no one really knows him that much, and I'm not sure why. And reading this feels as if you're reading Pride and Prejudice, but with our main girl, Emily Mashwick, fighting in a war. It's really low on magic, so if you're scared of all of these books because of the magic system, this is not something that will impact you here. And let's conclude with 2 books that I read in the last month that I am in love with. Starting with Piranesi, we have this very character-driven story. It's very short, and at its core, we will have this character that it's naive, that it's a cinnamon roll, and that he approaches the world following a scientific method and trying to understand why he is living in this massive house kind of world where he is almost alone. And then A River Enchanted. It's the most cozy book that you will read in a while. It's set in Scotland, and we'll have this isle that it's separated, and there are 2 people ruling it, but there are spirits. There's this mystery. These girls are missing. I've already concluded this duology, and I can say that it is incredible. Perfect if you want something that will warm your heart, but that will keep you entertained. And the story, it's very good, and it's very, very beautiful. And if you want to see other 20 fantasy books that, according to other readers, are the best ones to read out there, I will link here a video so that you can follow that line and discover new books.